So today we're going to dive into a topic that Kapil in particular has been hearing a lot about from you, and I think it's fascinating. It's the perspective on parenting. So Kapil, let's dive into it, and I want to start with I want to pick up on a conversation that you and I were having right before Thanksgiving when I asked you about your son, your oldest son, Amon, coming home after his first semester at Oklahoma State University, where he is part of the top ranked cowboy golf team out there. And we were talking about how well he did and how well he adjusted. And I made a reference that I felt like his upbringing and the home environment that you guys created for him helped him in that adjustment. And you started to challenge me a little bit on that. Why?
Because nothing is that clean. You know, parenting is very much it's a search. It's it isn't a linear pursuit. So nothing is that clean. Like I would never accept that, that I am a quote good parent. I don't know what that means, to be honest with you.
Well, I'm going to get to that in a minute, but
yeah,
you created an environment that has helped this young man believe enough in himself to play competitive golf for as long as he's been playing, and to go play for, there's only like 8 people on the team, for a team that's ranked number 1 in the country, Division 1. There are not a whole lot of people that could just by osmosis learn how to handle that type of pressure.
So what are you saying? Be frank with what you're saying.
That the environment that you guys created at home was a catalyst to helping him adjust the way he did, deal with the stage that he's on in the manner that he's dealing with. I think that he's too young to just have acquired all that on his own.
Well, I think one of the catalysts that you create as any parent is that you create a catalyst for a person to want to be on his own. I cannot, you were giving me way too much credit, and that's why I challenged you on it, because I think I've done far more wrong than I have right, so to speak. I have made many mistakes than I have done things, in a wise fashion. And, what is it that leads us on this search towards wisdom? It is precisely doing things in a way that isn't effective. So no, I mean, yeah, I guess it didn't happen through osmosis. I mean, we've been maniacally going at this for, gosh, how many years now? I mean, over a decade. So this has been at the hub of our existence, and traveling the world, pursuing golf tournaments and training in the rain and the cold and the wind and the snow and the ice and the dark. I mean, it really has been a maniacal pursuit, and that, to be honest, doesn't make for a very easy life. So, so I cannot agree that it's this rosy picture of. I mean, wherever there's ambition, there tends to be problems. And I'll be the first one to admit I've always grown up as a very ambitious person, and I think that there's some caution in ambition. Excessive drive, as much as I believe in it, and as much as it invests me, I must be honest and say that excessive drive also sabotages a level of peace. So I cannot sit here and take credit for, although it's by osmosis, but that he is doing well because I taught him to do well. No, I can't. I can't say that. I mean, a lot of these things just happen because of the kid and because of wanting to be on his own, which I think that we all want to do, and while we all want to be free. So that's why I challenged you on it. It isn't that clean. Nothing is ever that clean.
Well, I want to take a step back and really talk about what parenting is from your perspective and what a modern parent does and does not do. But I want to go back to, I want to stick on this point for a moment because you wrote a discourse about it. I'm sure you probably don't remember it, but I want to read a segment of it to you, and I want you to get it. I want you to comment on it because you touched on it briefly when you talked about the son asking, and it may not be asking you, but asking in general, why did you not teach me the proper way to do things? And the response was, when you were small, I had so much to teach you. I was overjoyed by the times I tried to guide you and instruct you, but all my efforts failed. And the reason that I failed is because I had to teach you what I was not able to teach you was wisdom. They were born, the ideas that I taught you were born out of my own limited experiences. They were born out of my own biased views. Truth be told, I do not know what is right and what is wrong. Explain that to me.
100%. Right and wrong is something that we use, and I used it just a little bit ago. And I used it in the sense of to imply that not everything was based upon wisdom. And so all we can do, what we call teaching, are the things that we think we know. And the things that we think we know are the result of our own limited experiences, which we tend to have the habit of extrapolating into a universal experience and as some sort of universal truth, and it's not. When we raise kids, when we have kids, we bring all of our effective points and all of our ineffective points. And in many ways, raising children is like victims raising victims. Because when you have children, you have not achieved some kind of enlightenment or great, massive wisdom. You are still learning yourself about who you are and who you are not, and what the world really is and what life is. And so it's very much an on-the-job novice training. So that's what I meant by, teaching the child through limited experiences and not knowing what really is right and what really is wrong. We consider to be right things that make us feel good, and we consider to be wrong the things that make us feel bad. And that is hardly a litmus test for what is truth and what is not.
But you've shared experiences. And some
Yes.
of the experiences may have been good, and some of the experiences may have been bad. And he can even, the boys can make their own decisions on that. But doesn't that give them a leg up on understanding, hey, if I'm faced with a similar experience, at least I've known how my parents handled it?
Yes, I suppose.
Isn't that better than not having those experiences and experiencing it for themselves for the first time?
I don't think it's a question of having it versus not having it. I think it's a question of what the entire framework looks like. I think it's the way that the puzzle pieces are arranged, as opposed to whether the piece is there or not. So if you ask it from a very narrow point of view of isn't having the experience better than not, well, yes, but there could have been. See, I look at it as there could have been so much more truth. There could have been so much more wisdom that I wish I would have known, back then, that I didn't know. And those things are troubling to me. I don't like not acting out of wisdom and acting out of ignorance. So you'll get a challenge from me, probably from every direction, if you come at it from the standpoint of, I did a good job or whatever it is. I just don't view it that way. I have a habit of very much looking at my own deficiencies far more than any small triumphs.
Well, one of the things that excited me when we were having that conversation last week was when you brought up this topic, and you brought up this topic as being, one of these lead topics on these podcasts. I happen to personally feel that one of the greatest responsibilities of society moving forward is for parents to step up. I think we put too much credence on, people outside the household to create opportunities and to try to help the next generation evolve. So if you take a step back, 19 years ago today, you had your son, and you guys became parents for the first time. What were you thinking back then? Do you remember what type of parents you guys wanted to be nearly 2 decades ago?
I think when you have a child for the first time, you're sort of, in a way, blindsided. You don't know what to do. You do whatever instinct says. You learn for the first time how to feed and what to say and not say, and you're so thrown into feeding schedules and diaper changes and all those things. You're in a frenzy. You don't know what to do, right? So I think because all of your efforts, all of your attention is so wrapped up into sort of the minute by minute, which needs your immediate attention, that deep introspection into how to raise a child is not really at the forefront. I think those things come later on as time goes on and the years pass, and things aren't so immediately necessary and urgent in your face, as when the child is born. That's when you sort of gain the time and the space to reflect, the older that they get.
So as you reflect now, what do you feel are the most important responsibilities of a modern parent?
Okay, let's speak truth. I think that the number one thing which has to be understood by anyone listening to this podcast is that there is nothing that I'm going to say that this is what you need to do and this is not how not to do it, that you should parent this way and don't parent that way. I completely and utterly and totally categorically deny all behaviors and all do's and don'ts and tips and recommendations, and it's complete nonsense to me.
I think
it's
that the
totally
people
irrelevant.
Great majority of people that would be listening to this are either really advocates of yours or have been following us, and they understand where you stand with that. So we get it. But guess what? We want to get inside your brain to understand what, even if from your perspective, right?
Yeah.
If Aman was 1 year old now, what would you feel with the wisdom that you've gained over the last 20 years in particular? How would you feel you would need to parent him and his soon-to-be brother?
There is a natural instinctive tendency never to question yourself. There is a natural instinctive tendency to believe that the way that you feel things should be is the way things should be. I think that is one of the most important things that happen. That is one of the most critical things that happens to us, that is really a blindfold. There is no opportunity, there is no space between ourselves and the thing that we think is the right thing to do. There is a natural tendency to believe in our own godhood as parents. A parent has too much power.
True. I agree with that.
These are the things that I have learned. The position is far too powerful. You have too much say when they're small, that you get to choose everything. And the problem with that is when any human being has too much power, he's corrupted. There are no consequences.
So what would you, when you think about...
I would say it's recognizing that fact. That's what I would say is there's no doing. You're going to ask me what to do. I'm never going to tell you anything to do. It is the recognition. It is every doing. The real doing is a non-doing. The ultimate action is understanding. The ultimate action is recognition. Seeing is the ultimate doing. Seeing is more doing than any possible doing you could do.
And that's what I love about you. And that's what I really enjoy and appreciate about these conversations. But I still have a point of view from the perspective that I know you guys did a lot of things right. We can talk about the things you did wrong all day long, right? But you did a lot of things right. You got two great boys that are pursuing, I'm not even going to use the word passion, because they may be passionate about golf, but they're pursuing something that they feel like they could really excel in. What are the most important things that you guys got right?
I don't know. My mind just doesn't go there.
I'm texting your wife on the other line, so tell me the truth.
If you want to know the truth, you're not going to hear truth in terms of the things we got right. It's far easier to tell you about the things we got wrong. I mean, honestly, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know is such a truthful answer. I don't, it's like if you decode all of this, I can't tell you this is what we got right. It's far, far easier to tell you what you got wrong because the consequences of wrong become visible to you. The consequences of right, not so much.
So tell me what you got wrong.
Not creating that space between myself and how I view things. Believing in the power of my position without questioning it. Not viewing things from the perspective of the child more often. Being intoxicated too much by my own drive or whatever it was for.
And are you referencing golf when you're talking about that?
I'm referencing everything. But probably the most thing I was driven about was golf, yes. Because that's what we did. That's what they excelled at. That's what they wanted to do. That's what everything was.
Well, there are 8 kids playing on the Oklahoma State golf team. They're number 1 in the country. If I were to ask him, were the 10 years that you worked with your dad to get to this position worth the opportunity to play, what would he tell me?
I don't know.
And I'm going to go on a limb and say he'd probably say, yeah, absolutely, it was worth it. But I want to go back to a point that you made that I think is really, really critical, which is looking at the world from the kids' perspective. What causes us not to do that?
I think what prevents a parent from looking through the perspective of the child is a facet of human nature, which is that unless a human being is required to do something, he won't. Unless his back is against the wall, unless he feels a consequence, he will not be compelled to do anything other than what is most instinctive and readily available to him. No human being acts unless there's a consequence. Without a consequence, a person will act and act upon whatever instinct is available to him. He will avail himself of the luxury of godhood, which is why I think parents have too much power.
Well, isn't the consequence of raising good kids that have high character?
No.
Isn't that enough of a consequence?
You don't know that at the time. You don't know that at the time.
But don't you get a glimpse of it? No,
you don't have that. You don't have that wide angle lens when they're very small. Everything is just too new. You are a different person than you were before you had kids. After you had kids, you have a very hard time remembering what it was like not to have them. So you are thrust into a role with which you have no familiarity. So your physiology is different. Everything is different, and so you are put in this position of throne, and it's too much too soon.
But we do it.
I think you fall back on your human nature, and human nature is self first.
So how would you describe the love you have for your boys?
You have raised a black box of a little word. That's a very difficult word to define, and I don't know what it means. I don't know what the word love. I know what the word attachment means, but I know for a 100% fact that the vast majority of time that the word love is used, it is actually describing attachment.
Sure, I could see that. I'm with you on that.
Okay, so
what's a proper
I think
term?
For what?
The relationship that both of you guys have with your boys.
I don't know what a proper term is. I think, honestly, the proper term probably is learning. That's probably the most proper term, is to learn. Is to learn what the truth about it really is. Is to learn what ways are effective and what is not. More importantly, it's to learn what are the instincts that you have as a parent, where they come from, and to make certain that they are not coming from a place that has no feedback loop, so that you don't become corrupted by your own power.
If I were to ask the boys how would they describe their relationship with you guys, how would they describe it? Do you have an idea?
The only thing that would matter is what they actually said. The guess is just theoretical chit-chat.
So what do they tell you?
I mean, about what? What
about the relationship that you guys had developed? Because one of the things too that you had said in one of the discourses was that, hey, the ultimate reason that you love in this context him in this discourse was because you abandoned all need from him and from anyone and anything else in the world.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Yeah. What happens is, see, all these tendencies tend to come up. I mean, everything is cause and effect, right? So one of the effects of having a child is that all of your attention goes on the child. Now, when I make that statement, it's an innocuous statement, and it sounds actually reasonable and logical. And of course, your attention should go on the child. But when I say that your attention goes on the child, I'm talking about not just the gaze of attention, but the weight of it. I think that everything, the spotlight becomes too bright, and that creates sort of a sense of imprisonment, I think, because too much attention goes on the child, not in the attention of tending to their needs and that kind of thing, but intention in terms of expectation and need. You fall into the trap of attachment, And with attachment comes need. And no matter how innocuous and how innocent and societally acceptable it may be, that need may be, it's still a need. And it isn't that it's wrong to have needs or right to have needs. It is what is the effect of having a need. And the effect of having a need is that it imprisons the child to have to satisfy that need. And if that need is not satisfied, then there's turmoil. There's turmoil for the one for not having satisfied it, and there's a turmoil for one whose need was not fulfilled.
So how would you when you take a step back, how would you describe the relationship that you have developed with the boys?
I'll tell you right now, the relationship that I have developed is to watch me learn about my own deficiency. 95% of the conversations that we have now are about the things that I have learned and the things that I still have to learn and the wisdom that I need to acquire, and to learn why some of the things, why things that we do, where the cause and effect of things lie, what the mind does to us. Those are the conversations that we have.
So as they observe that, obviously those are experiences that they can take and apply to their own life. You agree?
Sure, but that's theoretical. But yes, I mean, it wouldn't matter to me if they never applied it, because that isn't why I did it. I don't do it in order to teach. I am in many ways so beyond teaching. I do it, and I did it because it is a way for me to shed light on the truth behind all these relationships, and so that I can learn. I didn't do it in order to, hey, watch me and look how introspective I'm being so that you can then learn that. No, it has to be pure. It has to be genuine. And if there's any sense of, if a child has any sense that you're trying to teach him something, he shuts off. So it isn't about teaching. It isn't about, look at me. It's whatever wears off, wears off. And you can never predict what wears off. What wears off and the things that they hear are things that you never even thought they heard. And the things that you emphatically stated are definitely the things they didn't hear. So that's a no-win game. That goes nowhere. If you're going to be authentic and true to yourself and state what you feel about things and why you think things are the way they are, and you're doing it inside yourself, even though you're doing it out loud in front of them, then do it. But as a way to teach them, then it becomes disingenuous.
So when they watch you and observe you talk about the mind, the imprisonment of the mind, what it does to us and what it does for us, how do they take that and translate it into their own life? People come to you and engage you and pay you a lot of money to try to help them deal with it. Maybe not conquer it, but deal with it. You have two young boys at home that have great character, that want to do something with their lives. When they ask you those questions, how do you respond?
Oh, I respond totally honestly. But there's a difficulty with that response.
Why? Do they take it differently than anyone else?
No, there's a difficulty with my response, because my responses, and I'm trying to make them 100% pure, but oftentimes they're not. My responses are, they're the truth, but they're tinged with a thread of desire. In other words, and once again, this is going to be pursued as well. What's wrong with that? Well, to me, there's a problem. There can be no desire if to arrive at 100% truth and 100% wisdom. There can be no desire on my part as to how far they go and how successful they become. Okay, so if there is, then even though I gave them the truth, that lining of desire makes it lose its power a bit.
But they still want to know. You're you know,
Sometimes.
Dad, mommy and daddy are superheroes, right? I want to know, hey, if dad has gotten a glimpse of what it takes to not be imprisoned by his mind, or mom with her mind, I just want to know. Whether or not I can do it myself is another thing, but I want to know, how did you do it?
No, that is not a teenager question. That's a 49 to 72-year-old question.
So I'm asking you.
In some cases, yeah.
As a 25-year-old, I'm asking you.
Yeah, most 25-year-olds wouldn't even ask that question. That's a later in life question. No one, you don't get to that kind of question. Yes, there are some 20-year-olds that I've worked with that have asked me that question, but it's very rare. Usually you're 35 and up.
So give me a glimpse of what you say.
To what question? So ask the question.
To the whole idea of the notion of experiencing the mind and why it imprisons us and what I can do about it to at least gain some element of freedom from it.
Well, no one asks it that purely. Everyone comes at it because there is something that is deeply troubling them. And then that becomes their entry point into this conversation. If someone is perfectly so-called happy or content, they're not going to have any interest in such a question. That question is not going to arise. That kind of question only arises from pain.
So I want to know. Right? I want to get rid of frictions in my own life.
I think it comes down to a desire to want to stop playing the game. The game of conflict followed by temporary resolution, followed by rekindling of the conflict, followed by another resolution, followed by confusion, followed by sadness, followed by forgiveness, followed by apology, followed by conflict again. That whole game, one has to arrive at the point where he recognizes that this apology and this forgiveness and this end of conflict is only a matter of time before it begins again, because it is extraordinarily convincing that once apologies and so forth are made and the conflict ends, that this is going to be it, and it's never it. So the reason that it continues is because that is not seen. It is one is inclined to believe that that's it. So when one reaches the point that he fully and without a single doubt recognizes and sees, once again, that it is absolutely going to continue, then he begins to ask different questions. Then he stops asking, how do I end this conflict? Or how do I make the other person feel X and Y? What did I do wrong? And how should I improve my behavior? And what should I say? He stops asking those questions, which only lead to more conflict. And he starts asking questions like the one you asked about how do you get to the point of freedom? So that's where it arises from. There's some level of pain that usually is the impetus for exploring this deep realm.
And what do you discover? What have you discovered about yourself that gets in the way of us getting rid of that pain? I know it's not self-forgiveness.
Yeah, no. Getting rid of the pain, I think, is a understanding that firstly, no one really ever does anything to us, and that all of the things that we do to ourselves, and that part and parcel with that, in the very same breath, I will say, that just because we do it to ourselves, it does not mean that there is self-blame. So there cannot be any guilt and there cannot be any blame. And I sort of don't like what I just said because it came across as too prescriptive. And someone's going to write that down. They're okay, from now on, I'm going to practice not having guilt and not having blame. And in doing so, they've just ruined the whole game.
But it goes back to the notion that you've shared many times that I think is really kind of a defining characteristic of what we deal with, was this whole idea that all conflict is self-conflict. Whether you consider that a prescription or not, that's real. And as long as we can understand that and experience that, that in and of itself can help us get on a path.
Yes, absolutely.
Why do you
Yes, I
say
mean,
why do you say that most human beings will never be content with who we are?
you know, you can't be content with something that you don't understand. You can't be content with something that's always changing. How are you going to build your house on shifting sand?
So is that a constant path to misery?
Oh, it doesn't go anywhere. To be content with who you are basically means that you are content with who you think you are. And who you think you are is essentially a bunch of personality traits. How can you be content with a bunch of personality traits? Those traits are going to change according to whoever you meet in the street. There's no solid ground.
So what's a better way to reframe
you
it?
cannot,
Is
you cannot
contentment
be
the
content with,
the wrong word?
well, no, the thing that you're trying to be content with is the wrong word. You can't be content with a moving target.
So what does that lead to? None of us want to live miserable lives.
Yes, yes. And I think the number one understanding that has to arise from that is that if you do not want to live a miserable life, then what must be understood is that the pursuit of any prescription will absolutely cement your misery. And the reason that that is the case is because whenever you try to fix something, you only perpetuate it, because these things are not fixable. They're only seeable. Fixing is manipulation. And whenever you manipulate something, you may fix one side, but then you have ruined the other side.
So it is enough for us to understand this whole idea that
Absolutely.
we're not going to be content with who we are?
Well, you said it too easily. You said is it enough for us to understand that we're not going to be content with who we are? You didn't emphasize the fact that the reason that is not possible is, that's going to be viewed as a defeatist statement. And what I'm saying is that the reason that contentment with the self is not possible is because the self is a moving target. Who you believe yourself to be is not who you really are, because it's constantly changing.
Yeah, well, that's
the mind. The mind is like the weather, right? The mind changes every 5 minutes. If you're sad, just wait 10 minutes, and you'll be feeling something else. How are you going to plant a flag there?
We try.
Only because it is seen as immovable. Only because it is seen as something solid.
So you always fascinate me, and I want to kind of take a loop back to a question I asked you before, and maybe just end with some thoughts on parenting. The question I asked you before, again, was something that you had referenced about humans never allowing themselves to stray too far from their competition. And the reason I had asked you that was because we're a product of our own environment. We're a product of our environment at home. We're a product of our environment with our inner circle, and certainly at work, and so forth and so on. The few that stray from that environment, what are they doing to get away from their competition? What are they doing? What are these top golfers and elite CEOs that you're working with that choose not to put themselves on that same playing field as their competitors?
Well, I didn't say that people that the select few don't stray from their competition. I said that they don't stray too far. So the competition is always in sight, right? So I wouldn't say that professional golfers stray from the competition almost at all, right? Professional golfers, like many other professionals in other domains, they spend their careers trying to differentiate themselves from one another. But in fact, what they do is become one another. It's very nepotistic. They speak the same language. They talk to the same coaches. They listen to the same instructions. They read the same books. You can't help but become each other, because they live in this closed environment in which the vents in that environment blow this sort of manufactured air, which has a fundamentally different percentage of oxygen than that which is present in the real world. So everyone sort of drinks the Kool-Aid.
And that's true
so
in all aspects of life, I think.
Well, that's because, it's the nature of human beings. But if one begins to understand that deeply, then he no longer needs the competition.
Other than fear, what keeps us stuck there?
The uncomfortableness of being alone.
And you gotta just accept that and deal with it.
I hate the word deal with. don't like deal with. You don't have to accept anything or deal with anything. It's understanding what your natural proclivities are as a human being. And if you understand and see your natural tendencies, only then do you have the insight and the opportunity to not succumb to them.
So speaking of that, maybe we wrap up with this. How do you, at this stage in your life, how do you guys become a great resource for your boys as they continue to grow up, as they continue to pursue their professional endeavors? You told me what you did wrong. You probably did few things right, but what is it that moving forward, you've got two special teenage boys. How does the household continue to be useful to them as they continue to grow up?
By being honest about everything.
That's fair. And you probably find that's the minority.
Well, yeah, but I don't want to judge anybody.
But it's the truth in life and in
business. It is. Well, it is. And that's just, it tends to be a habit that, everyone tends to pull punches and flinch and so forth. But very few people are honest with themselves because they have ready-made answers that their culture has given them as to why they make the mistakes they do. And because they use those prepackaged answers, they never arrive at the ultimate truth, and therefore they never become free. So everything begins with honesty and encouraging honesty with the understanding that, if you speak your innermost thoughts and feelings, they will be respected.
So leave everyone listening with a question to ask themselves until next time.
In fact, I put up a question the other day on Twitter to ask your children. Which
was?
What is it that I have never really understood about you?
Wonderful. What is it that I haven't really understood about you? That is a wonderful question for us to ask our kids, for us to ask our closest relationships, and we can go on and on and on. But that's a good place to end. So until next time, thank you.
Thank you, Mo.